the economics tells us that if we allowed it to operate freely, supply and demand will respond to coincide, and they aren't in agriculture. One of the reasons is the massive distortion in the global agricultural trade rules. If the trade rules were fair, it would be a bigger contribution to lifting the living standards of Africans than any development assistance we might provide. The capacity of African producers effectively to compete on the international market and in the American and European markets would be a bigger transformation than all the investment we make in development assistance. So that, Australia's advocated that for a long time. I don't advocate that we should wait for that to happen to solve the problem, because I was about to say because glaciers are moving faster. Actually, at the moment, the glaciers are moving rather too quickly. I'll have to think of a new analogy, but certainly there are several tortoises passing the global trade negotiations. So I'm not optimistic that that will occur quickly enough to solve our problem, although it inevitably must happen. So what I wanted to then talk about is how can we bring these agricultural and economic things together, turning some of these wonderful developments that people such as yourselves generate in agricultural research, in new products, in new approaches, in new forms of productivity to the market. How do we generate investment for it? How do we get it out to farmers? And Australia's had some interesting experiences in Timor-Leste and in Papua New Guinea recently in creating circumstances in which the private sector has a demand and we are able through our aid initiatives to assist producers to increase the production to respond to that demand. And development assistance and good science can generate supply to respond to private sector demand. I don't really have time to go through the examples here, it would take too long. But that's one thing we can do, is apply our development assistance to help people respond to demand opportunities. The World Food Programme is coming up with some interesting options, which we were discussing with them today, about the way they purchase their food that generates a demand to which farmers can respond. The purchase for progress, as they call it. I get lost in the acronyms. I'm talking about P for P and I got a bit lost, but it's purchase for progress, and it creates a market for local farmers. Now one thing the World Food Programme and I don't yet agree on about this is they say they can do this with no increase in the price of the food they supply. I don't think that's right. If that was the case, they'd already be buying local food if it didn't cost any more. I think we have to be prepared to actually pay more, because we're actually buying two things. We're buying food and development. And if we have to pay a premium for that, it's not an unlimited premium, and there's a lot of debate to be had. I don't have a problem with that. The World Food Programme thinks they don't have to pay that premium, and I hope they're right. But I suspect that even if they're not, their idea is still good. I discussed with the Executive Director of the World Food Programme in Australia last week the prospect that in Afghanistan they may have to pay a 25% premium to buy food locally. But just generating profitable farming activity in Afghanistan is a transforming experience. And the fact that we're paying 25% more for the wheat seems to be a pretty small price to pay for the development opportunities that that's creating. That's not something one can do in an unlimited way, but it's important. We've had an interesting little example in Australia where we have provided $5 million to the World Food Programme as part of their relief operation for Zimbabwe. And they issued a local tender to buy the food. And for the first time in over a decade, we've got the participation of Zimbabwean suppliers to the World Food Programme. It's more than 10 years since they last bought from Zimbabwean suppliers, who of course used to be a very major source. And it started the process of rebuilding the agricultural sector in Zimbabwe. Of course, $5 million is not going to transform Zimbabwean agriculture, but it shows that using your money intelligently can make a big difference. And on Thursday here in Nairobi, I'm going to have a meeting with the African Enterprise Challenge Fund, which is an organisation hosted by the Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa, which is designed to make small grants which reinvigorate agribusiness and rural finance to benefit the rural poor. And we are looking to develop a particular Zimbabwe-specific window to the AECF so that we can make refundable grants. That is, if they succeed, they pay the money back. So you get a revolving fund so you can give the money to the next round of people, but they're not loans, so if they fail, it doesn't carry the risk that they have to pay back even if they fail. But this is a model that we think can use development assistance to generate effective agricultural business. We have some experience of doing that in the Pacific with a cooperative, with a similar thing called the Enterprise Challenge Fund, which we run through the Australian Aid Program. And we have, for example, funded a cooperative in Fiji which undertakes mandatory quarantine treatment on behalf of the fruit export industry. So 120 small-scale growers can get access to export markets. No one of them could afford to do what's needed to meet the quarantine standards. But if somebody does it on behalf of 120 of them, they can meet the quarantine standards and export to, not just to Australia, but throughout the world. And it's a very small, just over $250,000 Australian dollars, has got that cooperative to the point when it can do that task. I just want to talk about one more idea about the application of economics and science, and then draw my comments to a conclusion. I had the privilege recently of serving on a task force chaired by the Prime Minister of the UK, Gordon Brown, and the President of the World Bank, Bob Zellick, called it had a worse title than me. My title's pretty bad. This task force was worse. It was called the High-Level Task Force on Innovative Financing for Health Systems. It was a very euphonious title that everybody used all the time. But anyway, the task force, which is what we called it for want of a better name, was processing a lot of interesting, looked at hundreds of new ways of generating finance for health, human health and human health systems. And most of it, it's a very interesting report, but most of it not relevant to our discussion today. I won't bother to talk about it, but there was one idea that is currently being applied that I think has very sound application of economics to science in the health sector that might be applicable and is worth thinking about. They're called advanced market commitments. And how it works is this. There are a number of diseases of the poor for which it is not commercially viable for the private pharmaceutical industry to invest because they'll never get a return on their investment because the people who need the product can't afford to buy it. So they won't be able to sell it at a price that'll justify the enormous risk of seeking to produce a new product. But the parallel thing is we actually all know that if somebody produced such a vaccine, the aid donors of the world would buy it. But you can't expect a company to spend billions of dollars because they think probably if they do, we'll buy it. So the advanced market commitment it was generated essentially by the British government. The donors negotiate with any interested pharmaceutical company to say, if you succeed in producing, in this instance, a pneumococcal vaccine, we will buy it at this price. And we'll buy this much of it at this price. And that led to a massive investment because it changed the economics, and that pneumococcal vaccine was developed, and it's expected to prevent up to 5.8 million childhood deaths by 2030. Now, that AMC idea has only been applied to the pharmaceutical industry so far, but it seems to me the principles that underpin it, I don't mean it would operate exactly the same in this area, you know about these things, I don't know, but the idea that underpins it, that there are some things that science can generate to the benefit of poor farmers or poor people in need of food, that might not be commercially viable because the need is felt by people who can't afford to buy the product, so they don't constitute a market. And so people won't invest to produce the product. Now, the circumstances will not be the same. You can't replicate advanced market commitments. And so let's take that idea and apply it here. But it seems to me you can take the principle and apply it here, or at least it's worth intelligent discussion. So I would be very interested. I've tried to generate in Australia and at the Crawford Fund's discussions with representatives of various of the organisations represented here and others, that we might have a discussion about how this idea is taken forward. But my advocacy really isn't for that idea. It's for that urgent need to invest more in research and development, invest more development assistance in agriculture so that we can bring together the science and the economics to generate something, the equivalent of the Green Revolution. If we look at the development challenges that the world has faced the last 50 or 60 years, you can either look at it very pessimistically or very optimistically, because many things have gone wrong, and after 60 years of spending a lot of money on development, there's still a lot of poverty in the world. But we have actually made enormous progress. The number of children not in school has been dramatically reduced. The number of people suffering from malaria has been dramatically reduced. Polio has been virtually eliminated. Enormous transformations have taken place, and the successes have outweighed our failures. So I come to this challenge of the imbalance in the global food market and the long-term upward trend in food prices and its implications for the poor, particularly within a challenging environmental context that we confront with great optimism. I knew already from what I've read, but I had reinforced today, we have many, many wonderful and talented people applying their scientific knowledge to find solutions to the challenges. We actually know what the economics of transferring that science to good results for individuals to make people's lives better. We know how to do it. We can generate, I think, a green revolution for Africa, and it's not only important for the fight against poverty, but for a peaceful and a stable world, because a hungry world is a dangerous world, an inequitable world is inevitably an unstable world. So we have to recognise that for many people in the world, freedom begins with an end to poverty, so they can actually make some choices about their life. And ending poverty begins with the ability to satisfy our universal need for food. And I'm just so impressed and excited by what I've had a chance to see today in talking to and observing what people are doing here and knowing it's just the tip of an iceberg of what people are doing around the world. And I thank you for the chance to talk to you about it today. Thank you.